So where were we? Hello and welcome back to Beatdown. With another James Bond movie out in cinemas at the moment in the form of Spectre, let's take a look at one of 007's less distinguished missions, Moonraker. It's 1977, and after some teething troubles with his first two films, Roger Moore cements his own interpretation of Bond with The Spy Who Loved Me, which is generally considered to be his best outing, to praise from both critics and audiences alike, who wanted more. Little did they realise how literally that request would be taken. In the traditional closing credits, it states that Bond would return in For Your Eyes Only, except that turned out to not be the case. You see, that very same year, a little film called Star Wars became a tremendous hit, along with Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the two reinvigorated the sci-fi genre, with many filmmakers quickly churning out rip-offs and cash-ins to feed audiences' appetites. This didn't go unnoticed by Albert R. Cubby Broccoli, who immediately decided to change the next planned Ian Fleming adaptation to Moonraker. Ironically, despite the fact the book was taken from an abandoned 1950s screenplay, the novel's plot about a nuclear missile was felt to be outdated, and the movie is an in-name-only translation with only the villain's name Drax surviving. The objective was simple: James Bond was going into space, and so even for a series as big as Bond, the production was huge because of its heavy special effects and had no expense spared, holding not one but two records. One for the largest amount of breakaway glass used in one scene, and another for the most number of actors on zero gravity wires. Hell, even the title sequence is more expensive than the entire cost of Dr. No. But don't worry if you feel this may be straying too far from reality, as Cubby made the infamous promise that,
no, we're not science fiction, we're in fact science fact.
Yep, it's practically a documentary! Returning from Spy Who Loved Me is Lewis Gilbert in the director's chair in his third and final Bond behind that and You Only Live Twice, and writer Christopher Wood, who is well known for his sex comedy Confession series. Also of note is that the editor and the second unit director is John Glenn, whose work impressed Broccoli so much that he would be hired to direct the next 5 Bond films after this one. On one level, Broccoli's instincts were very much correct. Moonraker would go on to make $210 million worldwide, or $668 million by 2015 inflation, and was the highest grossing film globally that year, and the series wouldn't beat its box office until 1995's GoldenEye. On the other hand, the reception was very much mixed, with many welcoming the sight of James Bond engaging in space battles as much as the Fonz jumping over a shark with a pair of water skis, which is why the delayed For Your Eyes Only kept Bond's feet firmly on the ground in a more realistic tale by comparison. Funnily enough, the book Moonraker would go on to be a major influence on Die Another Day, and yeah, just look at how well that went. So let's blast off with Roger Moore as we ride the Moonraker.
Can't do the intro.
What do you mean we can't show
Do
footage?
you want to get sued by MGM?
Alright, okay. I want you to make a circle with your fist like this, okay? Da 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 da. Still follow me, right? No, it's not the one where the spaceship eats the other one. No, stop getting Bond wrong! Roll the footage. The film begins with the titular American space shuttle Moonraker being transported on the back of a British 747. But wait, 2 very bad men have smuggled themselves on board the Moonraker and launched the ignition, stealing it in midair and blowing up the aircraft below. Whose bright idea was it to have the rocket on the back of the aircraft fully fueled? Not only have you made it even heavier than it already is, but why would you even do that unless you wanted it to be hijacked? Hey, how did The Spy Who Loved Me begin again? Oh right, with the British nuclear sub disappearing after being stolen by the villains. If that wasn't enough deja vu for you, then check out the first scene with M, played by Bernard Lee for the final time, which aside from the colour of his phone is practically identical as he walks to Lois Maxwell's money pay to ask for Bond, where there's an ironically cut innuendo.
Moneypenny, where's 007? Moneypenny! Is 007 back from that African job?
He's on his last leg, sir.
I know that James Bond movies are heavily formulaic, but I draw the line at having the exact same scene with the same joke and the same timing. Moonraker is often criticised as being a rehash of The Spy Who Loved Me, but I didn't expect them to be literally identical. Okay, it isn't a complete remake of Spy Who Loved Me, there are some differences, like how we first meet Roger Moore's James Bond on a private plane as he's smooching some woman who will turn out to be in league with the villains. Oh wait, that happened in the last movie as well. Never mind, the woman and the pilot both plan to kill James by shooting out the controls and diving out despite Bond's attacks, only for Bond himself to be suddenly pushed out by Richard Kiel's returning henchman Jaws. See, instead of James Bond jumping off a huge cliff and opening a parachute, now he's jumping out of a plane without a parachute. Totally different. In an admittedly fantastic piece of stunt work that was directed by Glenn, Bond has to catch up to the pilot to steal his chute. And yes, they did this all for real in actual freefall. Not Roger Moore, obviously, he's just in the rear projected close-ups, but still. Naturally, Bond manages to wrestle it off the pilot's back and punt him to his doom. If you're wondering where the woman went in all this, and why she didn't bother intervening in the fight on the plane, don't worry, the movie's already forgotten about her. She's got a parachute, I'm sure she's fine. Alas, Bond's not done yet, as now Jaws is gaining on him, or more accurately his skydiving double that looks nothing like him with better teeth. Bond simply pulls his chute to get out of this predicament, but Jaws gets a new one when he rips off the cord, leaving him feebly flapping his hands in the air like an idiot. Luckily for him, there happens to be a massive circus on the ground below, which ridiculously cushions his fall. Science fact! If you fall out of a plane thousands of feet in the air, just be sure to aim for the conveniently placed circus tent. And so begins two running trends throughout the film. One, the buffoonification of Jaws, and two, an intricate action sequence ruined by a stupid punchline. And so we go into the peekaboo game that is classic Bond movie opening titles, where the filmmakers can see just how many nipples they can get away with in silhouette and keep their PG rating. Ah, the 70s. This is accompanied by Shirley Bassey's third and final title track for the series, which apparently she was a last minute replacement for, and you can tell because unlike her other efforts, no one ever mentions it, including her. To be fair, if I had to wall some nonsense about a Moonraker falling in love with me, I probably wouldn't have a high opinion of it either, although it is a slightly easier title to write a song around than The Man with the Golden Gun. James meets with M and Desmond Llewellyn's Q and is assigned to find where the bloody hell the Moonraker's disappeared to, but not before giving his handy gadget for the film, a wrist-activated dart launcher, the first of which he fires into the arse of King William III's horse. Much like how this film's a shot in the franchise's proverbial backside then. Bond's first stop is California, where Corinne Clary's, Corinne, flies into the estate of uber-wealthy entrepreneur Hugo Drax, who owns the facility where they make the Moonraker shuttles.
Everything you see belongs to Mr. Drax.
It's a lot, isn't it?
What he doesn't own, he doesn't want.
Carl Stromberg? But he's one of the richest men in the world.
Yes, I thought I heard that one before as well.
Good Lord.
The Drax Residence. Every stone brought from France.
Good lord, it's a giant matte painting to disguise the fact that we clearly filmed this all in France! It's here where Bond first meets Michael Lonsdale's Drax, who he is clearly highly suspicious of before he even gets sight of his subordinate Chang, played by Toshiro Suga, rather incongruously clad in oriental robes, which makes the bold statement of, yes, I am a Bond villain.
Look after Mr. Bond. See that some harm comes to him.
Michael Lonsdale's performance in this movie is great because he delivers his evil quips so dry and oozing with sarcasm. You can understand why that might be so appealing to me. James is also introduced to Dr. Holly Goodhead, played by Lois Charles, presumably named because calling her Dr. Blowjob would be a bit of a mouthful.
I am looking for Dr. Goodhead.
You just found her.
A woman?
Your powers of observation do you credit, Mr. Bond.
I heard you're a scientist, but a woman too? How surprising! The Bond movies very much reflect the period of time in which they were made, and let's just say that more films are full of the 70s casual sexism. The seduction scenes in particular are less, "Oh, James," and more, "Ew, James." For example, he spends much of his first encounter with Goodhead trying to show how clever he is by cutting off her explanations mid-sentence like a smug dick. To shut him up, she lets him try out a G-Force simulator. Bond's perhaps earliest indication that this is going to be a bumpy ride is when Chang enters and asks Holly to take a call from Drax while he replaces the controller and the safety overrides. The subsequent sequence, gradually building tension as the forces on Bond increase as he fights to stay awake and stop the centrifuge, works as there's no dumb comedy to distract from that aside from Dragon Lee here. Eventually Bond realises he has a Deus Ex Machina on his wrist and shoots out the inside, forcing it to shut down. It's easily one of the best scenes of the film because it's relatively simple setup and it's genuinely suspenseful. It's one of the few times in this adventure where James Bond actually feels like he's in danger, which is a bit of a problem when you're supposed to be making a thriller. Later, presumably after Bond's thrown up somewhere, he sneaks into Corinne's room to see if he can use a bit of the old charm to make her give him some information. James at one point plants a kiss that she clearly rejects.
You presume a great deal, Mr. Bond.
And yet just does the exact same move again, which he gladly accepts now. Never mind. She admits Drax is working on something secretive, and Bond shows his appreciation by shagging her. He sneaks off in the middle of the night to get more evidence from Drax's office, but Corinne follows him because she's clearly not too bright, apparently not realising he's a bloody spy, and asks him what he's doing. You do know that Chang is patrolling outside, right? She then leads him right towards Drax's safe with his secret plans. I wonder if that's stand issue 2, a spy camera with the agent's initials on it. Presumably so her enemies can know which secret agent to give it back to, should they ever lose it. The following morning, James goes to say goodbye to Drax while he's doing a spot of hunting like a shitbag. Yes, that horn just played also Sprax Zarathustra. Presumably there's a deleted scene of Bond walking up, throwing the horn in the air like the ape with the bone, and it landing on the blower's head. Drax encourages Bond to take his rifle and shoot at a bird, which is purely to get him in the sights of an assassin hidden in the trees. If you guess that Bond is going to miss and get him instead, that's because this was cliché back in 1979. I think if I were Bond, I wouldn't need any further evidence to prove that Drax did it, considering the guy has tried to kill him twice in the space of 24 hours and not been particularly subtle about it. After James departs, Drax summons Corinne and punishes her for her betrayal and the fact that she bonked Bond by terminating her from the rest of her life as he sets his dogs on her, as Corinne runs past the cart she drove in on, so they chase her through the woods and eventually devour her. It's quite a haunting scene, shot almost like she's Little Red Riding Hood in a fairy tale, and it's especially brutal considering this is Moonraker we're talking about. It's as camp as the tent that Jaws fell on. If you think the movie's not been too bad so far, prepare for a sudden nose-diving quality when Bond travels to Venice on the trail of the Vanini glass on Drax's designs who make the containers. As James wanders around, he sees Goodhead as part of the tour, at one point hiding behind an alien-shaped glass. Yes, we get it, thanks. When Holly separates from the group, Bond follows.
May I ask what you're doing in Venice?
I'm addressing a seminar of the European Space Commission.
Well, heady stuff. But there again, I keep forgetting that you are more than just a very beautiful woman.
Holy shit! Condescending much, Mr. Bond? Well, it doesn't matter to me if you're a highly qualified astrophysicist, because to me, you're just a pair of breasts I'd like to bang. Care for a drink later? He strikes out, but Bond's gondola just happens to be where they chatted and he goes down the canals. A funeral boat approaches and a very theatrical knife-throwing assassin pops out of the coffin and attacks, before getting a taste of his own medicine and collapsing dead back in it. Boom, boom. And in case you didn't get the hilarity of the joke, the film keeps cutting back to it. First as a low bridge knocks it into the river, and then as a man on said bridge sees it below and decides to quit smoking. Oh, so that's where the Superman sequels got their awkward cutaways from. And are you telling me they went around the whole of Venice and not once got caught under a bridge? James suddenly brings up a control panel and suddenly turns the gondola into a speedboat to get away, instigating a chase with several more villains in hot pursuit. What? At no point was there anything to suggest this was anything but a normal gondola. At least when James Bond drove around in the converted Lotus, we actually saw Q give it to him. Here it just happens to be full of gadgets because Bond is in it. As if that wasn't silly enough, James converts his gondola into a hovercraft, leading to one of the most jaw-droppingly dumb moments in the whole series. Wackiness abounds! This is the scene where the Lotus drives out to the beach times by 10. There's even a callback to that as the same guy checks his wine bottle in disbelief. James Bond has suddenly turned into Keystone Cops, complete with animal reaction shots. The pigeon does a poorly edited double take, for crying out loud. Even it can't believe this shit. If this doesn't sum up everything that's wrong with the Moore era, I don't know what does. That night, Bond breaks back into Vanini Glass, into an area that Goodhead was looking to get into earlier, and I hope your head isn't hurting from face palming yet. Yes, the keypad makes the notes from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and if you thought that was amusing, don't worry, because they'll do this joke 3 times just to really hammer it into the ground. Inside, Bond finds the room has been converted into a secret laboratory where some scientists are putting vials of clear liquid into the glass containers, and takes one away while they're out of the room, leaving several more exposed on the globes they're carrying out. When it smashes, the scientists die hideous deaths almost instantly because they stupidly weren't using protective suits for this kind of thing, but leaves the rats in there completely unharmed. Alright, steady on, Kato! So Chang attacks James while they're in the exhibit. This is the aforementioned record holder, and I certainly believe it, as they trash anything and everything out on display, no matter how valuable. Maybe Chang would have a bit more success if he didn't scream every time he made an attack, and I like how Bond has to check the vial in his pocket is okay. Don't panic, he's only engaging in hand-to-hand combat while carrying a highly lethal toxin that could kill them in seconds. Trust me, Bond, if you're not dead, you're fine. Bond chases Chang upstairs towards the clock tower where he finds loads of Drax stamped boxes marked for Rio de Janeiro. How convenient! Chang attacks James with a chain and the fight concludes after Bond gives him a few minutes.
Play it again, Sam.
A random Casablanca reference? That was very lame, Mr. Bond. Surely your time is up would have been a worthier quip. Still, Chang did die the way he would have always wanted to. Upskirt with his legs up in the air and no dignity. Bond sneaks into Goodhead's quarters where he soon deduces that she's been placed undercover with Drax by the CIA after going through some of her impractical gadgets, including an odd bit of product placement for Christian Dior that implies its scent might sting your nostrils a bit.
We would be better off working together. Détente.
Agreed.
Understanding?
Possibly.
Cooperation?
Maybe.
Trust?
Out of the question.
Ah, 2 rival spies working together on a shared assignment? Where have I seen that one before? Oh right, the previous Bond movie! At least he didn't kill her boyfriend this time. They consummate their partnership with a quick bonk, but then this scene is rendered mostly pointless because James ditches her in the middle of the night. Instead, Bond, for some reason, invites M and the Minister of Defence Frederick Grey, played by Jeffrey Keane, a Spyro Love Me character who will be recurring for the next several films, to show them the lab in Venice. Naturally, when they go through in gas masks, the whole thing has been dismantled in record time. And what was Bond's plan here exactly? Welcome two high-ranking government officials to personally verify that yes, this is a room full of deadly gas. Humiliated, Grey wants Bond off the mission, but he hands M the vial to send to Q. Quite why he didn't do that in the first place, I'm not sure. M recommends Bond take his leave of absence in Rio.
Now, regarding a replacement for Cha, you have someone in mind? Oh yes, well, if you can get him, of course.
Is Drax on the henchman hotline? Yes, hello, I'd like to request a discount because let's face it, the last one you sent me was pretty shit, to be perfectly honest. He is, of course, referring to Jaws, who is not going to let a little thing like falling out the sky dissuade him from grabbing a plane to Rio. Bond gets off the Concorde, don't worry, this wasn't the worst films we're associated with this year, and is taken to his gigantic suite, where he meets local MI6 agent Manuela, played by Emily Bolton, just prior to the inevitable bonking. I mean, you've got to admire Bond's stamina. He's managed to bed 2 women in the space of 10 minutes of screen time. Hell, he only knew her for about 2 of them. Bond just happens to have landed right in the middle of Carnival, because it always is in the movies, as Manuela takes him to a Drax-owned import warehouse. James goes inside while she does look out for some reason. Oh, that's right, because a looming figure dressed as a clown is coming towards her down the alley. Very slowly. Eventually, it turns out it's Jaws, and for some reason Manuela only appears to be armed with a knife instead of a gun, so he nearly gets to do his signature parlor trick. Until a group of revelers come out of a club and he pretends to dance with her. So here's the thing with Jaws, he was enormously popular in his first appearance and the producers knew they were on for a winner, thus deciding not to kill him so he could return. The only problem was that he connected with an unexpected audience, kids, who wanted to know why couldn't he be a good guy? So because of that, an assassin who we've seen kill people on several occasions is turned into an incompetent comic villain that can't even do his job properly because he doesn't kill anyone and loses all of his menace. I hope you're happy, kids who are probably 40 years old now. Bond finds the warehouse mostly empty apart from a link to Drax air freight, which allows him to get the drop on Jaws. However, before anything happens, the scene has a rather anticlimactic conclusion where Jaws just gets dragged off by a crowd pouring out of the club. And say goodbye to Manuela, who only showed up to sleep with Bond and get terrorised by Jaws. Bye! The following day, Bond uses the 7-Up sponsored cable car to use a telescope and look over the airport that Drax's air freight operates out of, where he bumps into Goodhead doing the exact same thing.
It's become distinctly chilly since Venice.
So?
So why waste time working against each other?
Yes, why didn't you start working together back in Venice? You wasted 15 minutes and added a completely superfluous character. Is this to make it seem less like the spy who loved me? You're not fooling anyone. As they take the car down again, Jaws stops them mid-descent, and whoever designed this mechanism really made a mistake using licorice for the cable, let me tell you, just like that idiot that made licorice door locks. They climb out onto the roof, and again, I'd remind you, those are actual stunt people on top, so when the Bond double slips, that guy really did nearly fall to his death. Jaws slides out onto the opposing car while his buddy in the booth starts the controls so they meet up halfway. Jaws does an amazing long jump, I'll have you know, but Bond otherwise manages to defeat him rather easily, tossing him to their car and sliding down the remaining cable with a chain. Jaws' mate turns on the car and speeds it up, so Bond and Goodhead drop off, sending Jaws hurtling into the bottom like Wile E. Coyote. That scene was so broad I'm surprised he didn't leave a cartoon outline in the side of the building, but if you thought it couldn't get any more embarrassing for Jaws, you ain't seen nothing yet. Oh, that's right. Jaws falls in love at first sight, set to the strains of Tchaikovsky's love theme from Romeo and Juliet. And there goes any trace of him being a credible threat. And yes, I did have to Google what that was. Don't worry, Bond and Goodhead are fine from their fall, a fact they're so relieved about they're literally going to roll in the hay until some baddies posing as ambulance workers attack them and take them on stretchers. That's how much sex Bond was having in the Moore era, he wouldn't even attempt to defend himself if he had an erection. James wakes up with Goodhead tied to stretchers, and Bond actually uses Goodhead's pretty face to distract the guard while he easily frees himself so he can fight him. In fact, one wonders why Goodhead doesn't easily do the same thing herself while this is going on. As this is happening, the ambulance takes a tour of product placement. Look, there's 7-Up, past Seco, a Marlboro sign beyond that. In fact, the guard even gets defeated by a sponsor as the stretcher with him and Bond rolls out the ambulance's rear and straight into a British Airways board. It's hilarious how blatant the product placement is. Their ads are literally in the movie. And how much does one have to pay for your ad to be the one to make the bad guy bite it? And then, in one of the most inexplicable cuts I've ever seen, suddenly Bond is riding on the back of a horse to the Magnificent Seven theme while wearing a poncho that makes him look like the man with no name. It's pastiching things that aren't even sci-fi movies anymore. It might as well drop the pretense of being a spy film and just become a full-blown spoof movie. It turns out he's visiting MI6's headquarters in the field, where we get sight of whatever wacky Q gadgets they got this time, including our first sight of the film's frickin' laser beam guns. Remember, this is science fact. We totally had laser guns back in 1979, just like how we totally have them now. Q attempts to brief Bond on the vial he gave him, but he might as well not even bother.
It's a highly toxic nerve gas that appears to have no effect on animals.
May I see the formula? It's a chemical formula of a plant. Orchidea nigra. A very rare orchid indeed.
Yes, it was thought to be extinct until a missionary brought one back from the upper reaches of the Amazoko.
Actually, he brought it back from the area of the river Tipperary.
Well done, James.
Alright, Mr. Know-It-All, anything you can't recite off the top of your head? Seriously, what's the point of even explaining it to Bond when the smug dick knows it all already? Aside from the sake of the audience? So James makes his way up the Tipperary River in the Amazon in a specially modified Q-boat, which is rather handy because he soon ends up in the second of the film's boat chases. Am I watching the one from Moonraker or Live and Let Die? Hard to tell! Bond uses gadgets to blow some goons out of the water, but Jaws is in one of the boats, so you know that something crazy will happen to him. Sure enough, they end up at the Iguazu Falls, so Bond ejects out via hang glider over the waterfall, while Jaws accidentally rips his steering wheel out and ends up tumbling down it. Don't worry, I'm sure he's fine. Moonraker is criticised, among other things, for its over-reliance on gadgets, and it's hard to disagree. Q may be overly optimistic about the chance of his equipment being returned safely, but he sure knows how to pack a quick escape hang glider when you need one. Soon after landing, Bond spots a beautiful woman in a white dress, which is a rare sight in the rainforest, and naturally follows it like a moth to a flame. She leads him to the Kiel temple, because where better for Drax to put his hideout than an ancient Mayan temple? Inside, pretty much every minor female character James has met along the way pops out, and he thinks all of his Christmases have come at once before he steps out onto an obvious trap rock that plunges him into the water, where Drax's snake comes out to play. So we get a rather pointlessly lame sequence where Bond struggles with a rubber snake until he uses a poison pen he borrowed from Goodhead earlier to untangle himself straight into the hands of Jaws. The man, I mean, not the shark. It's weird, you've got this big budget sci-fi movie with grand spectacle and giant space battles, and then you've got a scene with a naff snake in it that looks like it's out of an Ed Wood movie. Ah! It's robbery! This is deadly! Bond is taken to Drax's mission control as several of the Moonrakers depart into space, because a bunch of rockets launching into the sky are easy to miss in the middle of the Cold War.
Drax, one more thing. You delivered a shuttle to the US government. Then you hijacked it. Why?
Because I needed it. One of my own Moonrakers developed a fault during assembly.
That's screenwriting code for, oh shit, we nearly forgot how this whole thing started. Quick, make up an excuse! So apparently if he didn't steal that rocket, no one would have noticed this whole thing. Once Drax is bored of exposition, James is taken away and placed with Goodhead in a room that turns out to be directly underneath Moonraker 5's launch pad, where Drax plans to barbecue them as it takes off with him in it. Luckily, the room has a massive man-sized air vent, and Bond uses his Seiko watch with a hidden explosive inside it to blow it open and climb out before it gets toasty. They soon knock out the pilots for Moonraker 6 and take their place, taking control of the rocket as they follow behind the supervillain. And again, it's remarkable how little difficulty the pair have getting on the shuttle considering they're replacing two men. Good thing no one bothers to check Goodhead's ID card then. It's in this final section especially that Moonraker makes a fatal mistake. The scene set in space aimed for some 2001 style spectacle, and the Oscar nominated effects are largely solid, but devoting several minutes to watching miniatures and zero gravity is tedious, even for the time. Okay, it's not as bad as that 10-minute rotation sequence in Meteor the same year, but still pretty dull. Also, I'm pretty sure if you detach a tank like that in outer space, it doesn't drop like a rock like it's in Gravity.
Let's see what cargo we have. The animals went in 2 by 2.
What do you mean by that?
Noah's Ark. This operation.
You know how to fly a spaceship, Goodhead, but you don't know what Noah's Ark is? Is the lack of gravity affecting your brain? The Moonrakers are all on a guided course, heading towards the same destination.
What's that?
That's no moon. It's a space station.
So basically it's a hidden city like Stromberg's Atlantis in The Spy Who Loved Me, except it's in space instead of underwater. So not only is it blatantly recycled, it's even dumber this time around.
There's no image on the radar scanner. An entire city in space. And still nothing on the radar scanner.
So nobody on Earth knows it's there.
Drax must have a radar jamming system.
So let me get this straight. Drax managed to build and launch this massive space station with no one noticing? Even if it has a radar jammer, if it's in space, you'd be able to spot it with a telescope. It's not that hard to miss. The shuttle's docked with the station, and there's also a noticeable special effects flub. A shot of Moonraker 6 approaching the dock is used again as a freeze frame for when the ships are supposedly all connected, even though it clearly isn't. After some more 2001 homages, the station's gravity is turned on and everyone climbs out into this enormous, fantastically designed set. Regardless of the quality of the films themselves, the Bond movies look gorgeous and every penny is clearly on screen, even if it's hard to take this seriously considering this was extensively parodied in Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me, right down to the costume design.
Here, in the untainted cradle of the heavens, will be created a new super race, a race of perfect physical specimens. You have been selected as its progenitors. Like gods, your offspring will return to Earth and shape it in their image.
So basically he's going to destroy civilization as we know it and repopulate it from his hidden fortress. Again, that was exactly what Stromberg's plan was in The Spy Who Loved Me. And even though he's creating this super race out of Calvin Klein models, Drax is not explicitly stated as being a Nazi, even though in the book he very much is, and would explain why he's doing this. Bond and Goodhead make their way up to the radar jamming system, where again, Goodhead manages to distract the bad guys with her prettiness. They disable the blocks, and now it's being picked up at NASA, who instantly send a vehicle with Marines armed to attack Drax's station. It's almost like the movie's rushing because it's all been building up to this point. As Drax begins to launch his nerve gas-filled globes around the world, James and Goodhead are captured once more by Jaws, but even this can't go by without a comedy bit. That clang from Jaws' balls there is the sound this joke lands on the audience with. They're taken to Drax, who wants to chuck them out of the airlock, but not before explaining his evil scheme, naturally. In particular, the bit about exterminating anyone who doesn't fit his standards, which doesn't sit well with the new lovey-dovey Jaws, who performs his kid-pleasing heel face turn. Meanwhile, the American shuttle is detected, so Drax sends out a giant frickin' laser beam to try and shoot it, but before it fires, Bond hits the emergency stop on the station's rotation, disabling the gravity and making everyone do Star Trek impressions. Cue a lot of floating around, and we get more of it as the station sends men out to battle those emerging from the American shuttle, and we have a laser battle in the middle of space. Yes sirree, this is all science fact. We were totally having space battles back in 1979, and I know this is basically the submariners battle from The Spy Who Loved Me, but even I'm tired of those comparisons by this point, so this is more like the underwater battle in Thunderball. I have no idea who's winning, but it sure looks expensive. The station's gravity is restored as the US shuttle docks with it, so we get more Flash Gordon antics on the inside too, as Bond and Goodhead lead them in to destroy the production designer's hard work. Drax tries to flee, but James is coming to deliver the coup de grace.
At least I shall have the pleasure of putting you out of my misery. Desolated Mr. Bond.
Heartbroken, Mr. Drax. Take a giant step for mankind.
That's awesome. James really made sure he got the point. I believe Drax's last thoughts were, "Ugh, I can't believe that British bastard shot me. Now I'm floating out in the most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today." With the master race pretty much eliminated, thus giving us average-looking people a better chance than the gene pool, Goodhead, Bond and the Marines evacuate the crumpling station. I'm also pretty sure all the people fighting in space have vanished into the vacuum. Two people who haven't are Jaws and his girlfriend Dolly, who are reunited as he delivers his only line in his 2 films.
Well, here's to us.
I mean, on the one hand, it is nice to see a Bond villain get a happy ending for once. I just wish it wasn't at the expense of systematically destroying everything that made the character so popular in the first place. James and Goodhead go for Drax's Moonraker 5, because that is the one fitted with a laser on it. How the hell would they even know that? They're stuck to the dock, but goody-goody Jaws is on hand to help free them before the section of the station the Lovebirds are on breaks off towards Earth.
Don't worry, they'll make it. It's only 100 miles to Earth.
Provided they don't burn up on re-entry. Fingers crossed! As the space station explodes, Bond and Goodhead set out to destroy the 3 launched nerve gas globes. Yes, sort of like how he had to stop the nuclear missiles last time. Moreover, for the climax of this action film, we end up getting a rather dull game of target practice, especially for the first 2, which are easily destroyed with the automatic tracking. Of course, things are a bit tougher with the final one, as a malfunction forces a switch to manual.
James, this is our last chance.
Use the Force, Luke.
The Force is strong with us. You switched off your targeting computer. What's wrong?
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
That's right. This sequence is basically there to give them their Death Star moment, because if we've learnt anything, if an audience likes something, they want it copied verbatim. And now that the world is safe, that means only one thing. Time for the Big Bang!
007. My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
Okay, admittedly that is one of my favourite ever Bond lines, and we'll leave aside the fact this is basically the same scene as Bond and Triple X getting caught in the escape pod, just like how everything else in this movie feels like a rehash. The James Bond movies are very formulaic, and that's all part of their charm, but there's a difference between that and outright duplication, and Christopher Wood's screenplay at points is simply his Spy Who Loved Me script reskinned to space, with the humour turned up to astronomical levels. While that certainly makes it bad on a story level, is it the worst Bond film? Not from an entertainment perspective, as it does feature a lot of great stunts and spectacle as per usual, and the outrageous moments are enjoyably silly in their own right. Moore especially looks like he's having a very good time despite having no chemistry with Lois Chiles, while Michael Lonsdale may be a cliche of a Bond villain, but he delivers some deliciously droll lines. And regardless of my feelings on what the film does to Jaws, Richard Kiel is a legend in the part, even in this diminished role. The film's other major issue is the pacing, as there are too many pauses for awe that let the audience have too much time to ponder over the absurdity of what they're seeing as the effects take over. Does it know it's ridiculous? Of course it does, but even by Bond standards, outer space is a bit much. But if you want to see where the franchise most bordered on farce, look no further. Moonraker is preposterous fun, even if the question you'll be asking with a raised eyebrow is that a gun in your pocket, Mr. Bond, or your tongue in your cheek? I'm Matthew Buck, licensed to beat down bad movies everywhere.